The Gulf Injustice Podcast, the official podcast of Detained in Dubai with Radha Stirling.
Is Liz Truss fit to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? And let's have a look at how she's performed as Foreign Minister over the past 12 months in her role. Now, firstly, we have Christopher Emms, a British national who has heavily criticised Liz Truss for not assisting him in any way following his arrest in Saudi Arabia. He was arrested on the basis of a frivolous Interpol red notice issued by the United States for attending a cryptocurrency conference in North Korea several years ago, at a time where diplomacy was improving and it looked like they were going to become a friendly nation. Now, Chris has been accused of violating sanctions that simply don't apply to him. They're US domestic rules that apply to US persons and US citizens. Chris Emms is a British citizen, has violated no British law, no international law, and no Saudi Arabian law. Yet he's been detained there for 6 months, facing extradition proceedings from the United States, and the US hasn't even presented any evidence to the Saudi Arabian authorities to back up their request. Now, in standard extradition proceedings, a country would usually submit this documentation within about 45 days would be the maximum, and then you'd be released if the country failed to do so. But the British government, what have they done? Absolutely nothing. They've checked, is Chris being tortured or abused? If he were, they probably wouldn't do anything then either. But Chris's bank accounts has been frozen. He's been staying in a country that he only intended to visit for a few days and has had to pay extortionate legal fees. It's a dire circumstance for him. It's completely illegal and unlawful and unethical what the United States has done. But what has Britain done to fight back against this abuse? Since Brexit, we can see that the US is actually trying to increase their influence, perhaps test the United Kingdom to see how far they can go. What kind of domestic policies can they change within the United Kingdom, whether it's suddenly the UK supporting genetic engineering, farming, all sorts of trade agreements are going on. But not only that, that because of this increased partnership or friendship with the United States and the fact that we are a bit separated from a group like the EU, it means that US wants to test, can they get away with things like this? Can they get away with abusing British citizens? And the answer so far with Liz Truss, who has been approached by Crispin Blunt MP for Christopher Emms, and Liz Truss has not responded. She's done nothing. She hasn't sought at all to enter into diplomatic communications with the United States or with Saudi Arabia to bring this British citizen home. Now, if he is going to undergo extradition proceedings, there is no reason that she should not be able to negotiate for Chris to be able to be subject to British law, to be returned to the UK where he could fight them in his own country. Then we move on to Albert Douglas, a British grandfather who has complained repeatedly and publicly about the torture and human rights abuses and the humiliation that he suffered at the hands of Emirati authorities during his detention over a bounce check that he didn't sign.
My name is Albert Douglas. I'm currently detained in Dubai in the notorious penal correction maximum security prison. During my time in the care of the United Arab Emirates police authorities, I've been tortured and beaten. My left shoulder was broken and my head was kicked around like a football by the police, leaving me with serious medical conditions today. My human rights have been abused on more occasions than I can remember. This includes being deprived of water and food. On one occasion, I was forced to drink water from a filthy toilet in order to survive. Liz Truss was the person who was personally in charge of my case, as well as numerous other British prisoners in similar circumstances to my own desperate situation. As part of a trade deal, the UAE authorities asked all of us to sign a consent letter allowing us to return to the UK from the United Arab Emirates. This we did immediately. Liz Truss then decided to not include this in the trade agreement, leaving us all abandoned by her. Instead, Liz Truss chose dirty money and oil over torture and human rights abuses to us British citizens. Recently, when asked about this matter by the Foreign Affairs Committee, she simply said she could not remember. Sounds like Boris Johnson to us.
Gulf trade document that you just published, you say the government will continue to hold those who violate human rights to account. How are you doing that in the Gulf states at the moment?
Well, these issues are raised regularly with the relevant ministers and leaders who we meet in the Gulf states.
You
and
have
what
personally?
our aim, I have personally, yes.
Well, your spokesman said that you hadn't. So what's the last human rights issue that you raised with a Gulf state leader?
I'd have to come back to the committee on the precise timing of that, but I certainly
anything.
have
Just
raised
tell us
it.
anything that you've said on
well,
human rights.
Well, I certainly have raised it when I was in...
Go on, tell us one now.
I'm just trying to remember my most recent visit, but I can assure you I have raised it, and I will write to you with the details.
You can't remember a single human rights issue that you've raised with a Gulf state leader?
Oh, I've raised particular issues when I've been in the Gulf about
name
human
one.
rights issues. Well, I'm not going to go into all the details of private conversations, which I will come back to you on in due course.
I'll name one.
Well, from all the British victims here, we have a message for you. Liz Truss, shame on you for your life.
Now, it has been absolutely proven 100%. The UAE has put him in front of a medical committee in Dubai who agreed that he has been beaten, he has been tortured. He's suffered broken bones and permanent disabilities. He's had to undergo multiple surgeries and they're still not finished. He's expected to have further surgeries. And this is a serious violation. It's unacceptable. How on earth can Britain stand by and have their ally do this to a British citizen? It's not the first time it's happened, but it should have been the last a long time ago. And it's kind of unfathomable that Liz Truss has not stepped in to do something about Albert, who's still, over 1 year later, in prison on financial crime allegations and having to undergo multiple surgeries again and again. It's extremely violating for him to have to do this. We've already submitted an application to the United Nations for his torture and abuse and arbitrary detention. Then we have Billy Hood, a young footballer who was detained over CBD oil left in his car by a visiting friend. Now, it was left in the car when Billy was dropping him off at the airport. It's CBD oil, and yet he's been in prison for around a year now in Abu Dhabi, and he himself has been beaten. He's complained of his mistreatment. He's been denied medical care and attention, even when suffering an infection. Now, this is just absolutely unheard of. In that the British government has not done anything. This is probably the first time. They haven't been the best in the past, but it's quite appalling to see them doing literally nothing. Now, last year in December, Felicity Buchan MP raised these two cases to Liz Truss in Parliament and said, Liz, what are you going to do about Billy Hood and Albert Douglas? And she made some sort of vague promises and said, maybe I'll get around to it. Yes, we do care generally about human rights in the Gulf, but she did not follow it up with any action whatsoever. Now, recently, Albert Douglas was asked by UAE authorities, along with 13 other British prisoners, to sign a consent form to be transferred back to the United Kingdom. Now, this was apparently going to be a push from Emirati authorities to Britain to transfer these British citizens back. And a meeting was to take place where the prisoners were led to believe that this was going to happen. The meeting took place and nothing was said about the prisoners. The only announcements that came forward were about trade and economic deals that they were making with the Emiratis. So the prisoners are obviously very disappointed. It's unbelievable that torture victims, human rights victims, have not been attended to by Liz Truss and by the FCDO. It's an appalling state of affairs. And if one can't prioritise, it needs to be balanced, obviously. As the foreign minister, they need to balance not only trade deals and economic relations, diplomatic relations, but also the human rights of their own citizens. I think that is paramount. You can't have one without the other. And not caring about your own citizens sends a message to other countries that they can do what they want, that they have open green light to treat British citizens terribly. And this can't go on. Jeremy Hunt, during his time as the foreign minister, he came forward, he talked about Lala Sharavesh, who had been detained there over a Facebook post. He publicly advocated for Matthew Hedges, and he was very strong in his commitment to ensure that Hedges was freed, to the point where he even threatened sanctions, or said that he wouldn't go so far as to rule out sanctions against the UAE if they continued to hold Matthew Hedges on trumped up charges while he was complaining about human rights abuses and torture. Now, that is a foreign minister that you can get behind. You can see that they are balancing trade and economic deals at the same time as they are valuing their voting citizens, the human rights of the people that they have to care about if they're going to get elected. Now, Liz Truss absolutely needs to address this and not just focus on becoming the next prime minister, but actually go back, look at what she hasn't done and quickly do it now. She was asked about a month ago in a question, what has she done for Gulf human rights? And she failed to respond. She couldn't answer. And she couldn't even remember the names of Albert Douglas and Billy Hood, despite the extensive correspondence that she has had with Felicity Buchan, despite the fact that she was questioned in Parliament, and despite the fact that these cases have been all over the British media, BBC Breakfast, Good Morning Britain, Sky News, it's been everywhere. And Liz Truss, whose job it is to protect those citizens, could not remember at all. So I will leave it with you. Tell me, does Liz Truss deserve to be the next Prime Minister?
Thank you for listening to the Gulf Injustice podcast.